Welcome everyone. Very pleased to be here, partnering at this event and spending the next half hour talking about the very broad issue of migration, but it just doesn't need the headlines, which is interesting, isn't it? Over recent years, the way we've talked about it has changed quite rapidly. We've got Amy Pope here, you'll know from the organization, International Organization for Migration. Amy, just explain what the organization is. A lot of people think it's a UN organization. It's not exactly, is it?
Well, we're UN affiliated, so in 2016 we joined the UN family, although we still retain our own constitution and membership, so it's slightly different.
Okay. I looked in one of your reports and it had this very stark figure saying since 2014 more than 52,000 people have died whilst trying to escape crisis-affected countries. And this really speaks to a lot of your work, doesn't it? I mean, these people don't want to go.
Yeah. And what we're seeing is that the current international architecture isn't really built for the reasons why people leave today. So, for example, last year we saw more people who were displaced by the impacts of climate than by conflict. You look in a place, this region in particular is very impacted by climate change. We see people impacted by drought, by melting glaciers, by water scarcity. And the bottom line is if you don't have a safe place to live or if you can't farm your fields, you're going to move. That's just what people do. But the system that has been built since World War II isn't really available to help support those communities. And so we see more and more people flee, more and more people rely on smugglers, more and more people use irregular migration routes than ever before.
And you've got a quote here saying migration should be a choice, not a necessity, because it has got this brand of just being horror, but actually migration is good as well, and we forget that.
Yeah, in fact, the World Bank just a year ago did this really comprehensive report that highlighted how, on balance, over the years, migration has been a tremendous force for development. More communities are better off, more individuals are better off as a result of migration. It makes sense because people are migrating to where they can find job opportunities, they learn skills, they send money back home, and for many people who go home after having been a migrant, they bring that expertise back into their economies, and that leads to more development.
Yeah, and people see it as a humanitarian issue, but it's interesting that you've talked a lot about how migrants are often left out of any sort of humanitarian planning, which is true when you think about it, and quite extraordinary.
I've seen it around the world. For example, I was in Lebanon shortly after there had been bombing in southern Lebanon. Many people, as we know, fled. The migrants were often left behind, nowhere to go. And so with the support of the Catholic Church, amongst others, IOM was there to help the migrants find a safe place to sleep while their employers had left. In some cases, we had to help migrants get back home to where they'd come from.
So that's where you see your role. Often you get dragged into these situations because the other organizations aren't dealing with it.
And that's why we exist, right? So we were created after World War II to help the millions of people who'd been displaced by the war find safety. In some cases, go back home if they could go back home. In other cases, find a new place to live. That work we have continued over the years, but the way it looks has evolved quite a bit. My goal, though, is increasingly to move away from migration as an emergency response to something that can be more planned, more strategic, and something that can drive development as opposed to just reacting. And that's part of why we're here at this forum. In this region in particular, there are large numbers of people who are migrating for work opportunities. There's a need for migrants, and we're seeing migrants come from places like Bangladesh or India or Pakistan, and we're seeing opportunities for people to migrate elsewhere in the world, to get job opportunities, get training, and bring that back home.
So you're, in effect, representing migrants at these high-level events because you can, and you're just reminding everyone that don't forget the migrants. Is that what you often find yourself?
Not just don't forget the migrants, but really build migration into your development plans.
Yeah.
If you are a country that is being impacted by drought, don't wait until drought is displacing entire communities until you act.
I want to ask about, because you're relatively recent in your post, aren't you? You used to be in the Biden administration, I think I'm right in saying. Also with Obama? You
I
with
worked for both presidents, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You've talked about bringing fresh ideas and fresh perspective as a leader, which is, dare I say, what every leader says.
Oh, come on.
So what does it mean?
Mine are really fresh. So I think, first and foremost, I'm not of the UN system, and I'm coming from a country that was a major, major donor to the United Nations system. And I think when you come as a donor, you often expect results. You want to see that taxpayer money is leading to change. Part of my perspective is, how do we be as practical as possible, as outcome-driven as possible? Let's not argue about the placement of commas. Let's figure out how we can have a more of an impact for people who need us. I also have spent time working in the private sector, and frankly, that was probably the best training I got in terms of how you manage a budget. And if you have to bill your time, what do you have to show for it? I feel in my role as the head of this organization that we have an obligation to our member states and to their taxpayers to show that we are using the money effectively and that we are not using it to have lots of internal conversations about what this could look like, but demonstrating what good looks like on the ground.
By going there, because you've traveled an extraordinary amount.
I travel because that's where the work is. The work is not in Geneva,
yeah.
which is a lovely place to live, but we don't have a lot of people displaced living in Geneva, right? So getting out to Haiti, getting out to Congo, getting out to Gaza or Ukraine or Afghanistan, that's where we can make a difference. Coming to places like this, meeting with the leaders of these countries, that's how we shape our work.
I haven't seen you dancing here.
We'll get there.
This is because Amy's known for dancing with migrants, right?
Yeah.
But this is part of the message.
Yes. It's part of the message is that migration doesn't have to be something that is horrible. It does not have to be a negative. Yes, a lot of people I'm meeting them at the worst moment of their life where they've often lost everything and they're living in a strange country and they don't know what their future will look like. But they're still people, and they're making decisions based on the best available options for them. For me, being able to meet people as people, no matter what circumstance they happen to be in, is part of the message.
And you've talked about diversity. I mean, working with migrants is, by definition, isn't it, diverse? But your leadership team is mostly women. I think you're the first woman in your job.
Yeah.
Is that intentional, or is that just how you wrapped yourself with the people that had the expertise?
You know, it's not intentional, although I have to say it's been quite effective. And, you know, it's a group of people who are very committed to getting things done. There's not a lot of ego. It's just about output. And that's very refreshing, because you'll know if you work in high levels of government or certainly high levels of the UN, oftentimes ego will get in the way of outcome. So we have a fantastic team. I'm pleased to say it's representing all parts of the world. I do have 2 men on my leadership team who provide tremendous insight and expertise, and we are focused on finding ways to work together so that we deliver.
What did you make of the President of North Macedonia's comment about there still not being a female leader of the UN?
What I loved most was her comment basically along the lines of, when you have powerful men with weapons, you need powerful women with wisdom.
Yeah.
Right? So there's something to be said about having balance. Now,
There's sometimes an argument, isn't there, to say it's gone on for too long. I don't want to get into the whole positive discrimination debate, but the idea is that over time the leadership does reflect nations, so it should reflect, be more diverse than that, presumably.
I think, especially because I work in migration, I think it's valuable to have different perspectives around the table. I want the smartest people I can find.
Yeah.
I want the hardest working people I can find. But I also want people who are going to challenge my assumptions, and I want people who are going to bring to the table a different perspective. Otherwise, it's very dangerous. You end up just reinforcing the same concepts over and over, and I don't think that that works, especially with the challenges we're facing globally. So I have been lucky to have tremendous people on my team, but I have put in place new ways of assessing talent, right? I have very competitive processes now to hire all our chiefs of mission, and that's not the way it's always been done. But I think when we're dealing with issues of conflict and climate and poverty and inequality, I need the smartest people around the table to help make those decisions.
And also, you do have fresh challenges now, because I know people in your position hate talking about politics, but you've been forced into politics because the issue you work on is effectively the flagship policy for most hard right parties in Europe, obviously what's happened in America as well. How are you dealing with that?
So my goal is as much as possible to stay out of the political and focus on the practical. You can't always do it, right? But part of it is identifying the partners who want to see safe, legal migration because it's in their interest. So that means partnering with the private sector. In many cases, the private sector will make decisions about where to locate new business based on what their workforce will look like. And migration is a key piece of that conversation. It also means engaging with mayors and local community actors. You speak to a mayor in a city like Milan, and you will hear they need migrants. It also is figuring out where our partners are and not assuming that someone's political party will dictate whether or not they're going to be an effective partner. Prime Minister Meloni is going to be here later tonight, and she has been really innovative in finding ways to deal with the demographic challenges they have in Italy by creating labor mobility pathways for people to come and work in Italy. You wouldn't think that based on her party's, her party affiliation, but she's very practical and she's focused on what's the best for her country. And so finding those partnerships is critical. Again, it's why coming to a region like Central Asia is critical, because here you see the movement of people in the region, you see incoming migrants, you see people moving abroad, and we are finding that the leaders here are much more pragmatic about finding a way forward.
On the political side, there are things that certain leaders do which upset people you work with, and you have to deal with that. And I'm going to bring up this example because this is something that we reported on, which is the South African farmers, who are the only white South African farmers, are the only ones that are currently allowed asylum in America. And then you speak to our correspondents in South Africa, and they say there is no genocide here, and how actually black people suffer from the death rate more than any white person. Anyway, it's a very complicated, horrible debate. But how do you reassure people that you're doing your work when you have situations like that, which clashes for so many people?
On the question of South Africa, the first question for us is, what is the position of the South African government? We are a member state organization. We cannot go into a country and say, we're going to do something you oppose. It's part of our responsibility as a UN-affiliated organization to respect the territorial integrity of any government. So in the case of South Africa, we were not in a position to work with the US in terms of moving people out of South Africa because, very straightforwardly, the South African government was not supportive of it. So again, that just brings it down to a very practical level. We are apolitical, we are humanitarian actors, so our job is to provide support to whomever needs it, but it doesn't give us license to operate somewhere where we don't have the okay of the government. It also means, though, that we have to, this on an issue that is so political, it is finding ways to provide very practical advice and support to our partners. We don't set the immigration policies of governments. Every government has the right to set its own policy. But we do have a lot of experience and expertise dealing with the issue, and where we can provide capacity or understanding or expertise or data, that's where we can add value.
What about this new idea, for most people, I'm sure it's happened in history, but voluntary deportation? I mean, how do you even understand that?
So we as an organization are not involved in forced deportations. But we do feel a responsibility wherever migrants might be stranded, wherever people may be coming home and not have resources, wherever people may want to go home and not have resources, we are there to help them get home. And we've done that, as I said, since our founding after World War II. We've done that here in Europe for migrants who are in European countries. They don't have status, they can't stay, and so we help them go home safely, legally, with dignity. And then as much as possible, once they come home, help them find opportunities so that they can find some stability and safety. So in the case of the United States, it's the same calculation. If there are people who want to go home and we can help them go home, we can treat them humanely and with dignity. From our perspective, that's consistent with our responsibility. We, as I said, stay out of the political conversations and see our first obligation as to supporting migrants, our member states, so that we can find safe and effective solutions.
I think before we go, we should mention Gaza, because people look to that thinking, it could end up being a massive refugee crisis. How do you prepare for something like that?
So I had the chance to go into Gaza in February. It was during the ceasefire. And I saw and heard from many people on the ground. Their number one concern at that point was shelter. Can you help us set up tents? Can you help us find more stable shelter? IOM is what we call a cluster lead. We are one of the leading organizations in providing shelter for communities who have been displaced, first and foremost inside their own country. And we have 40,000 tents for the people of Gaza that are in warehouses in Jordan. We'd like to get those in, right? During the ceasefire, we were able to provide support. We were able to work with partners to be part of that life-saving assistance. We'd like to do more of it. And frankly, the people of Gaza are desperately in need of that kind of humanitarian support.
Okay. Amy Pope, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.